All right, so today we're going to be talking about Chapter 11, Lesson 1. It's called Angle and Line Relationships. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is pairs of angles. We have 4 of them that we're going to be talking about. So let's go through this. So vertical angles here. Vertical angles. These are angles formed by 2 intersecting lines. They share a vertex but not a side. What these will generally look like is if I make a diagram, I'm actually going to use this diagram for the next one as well, but if I label these as 1, 2, 3, and 4, angles 1 and 3 are vertical. They're formed by the 2 intersecting lines. They share the vertex, which is right here, but they do not share a side. So we would say that angle 1 and angle 3, and then the other pair would be 2 and 4. Now, what's special about vertical angles is they are congruent, which means they are equal to each other. And the symbol that we use is an equal sign, the little squiggly line, a little tilde. The next one, adjacent angles. Same thing. These are angles formed by 2 intersecting lines. They share a vertex and a side. So essentially, these are angles that are right next to each other. So if we look back at our diagram here, angles 1 and 2 are right next to each other. So they're adjacent. Angles 2 and 3 are also adjacent. They're right next to each other. 3 and 4 are adjacent. And 1 and 4 are adjacent. Those are all adjacent angles. So you'd say like angle 1 and angle 4. That's one pair. Big note, these are not congruent. Next to complementary and supplementary angles. Complementary angles are 2 angles whose sum is exactly 90 degrees. Exactly 90 degrees. And then supplementary is the same thing. They are 2 angles whose sum is, the only difference here is this is exactly 180 degrees. So this forms a right angle. These form a straight angle. And in fact, that's one way that you can remember how these 2 are related to each other. Supplementary and straight both start with S. And that's how I remember, at least, that those 2 are what related to each other. So supplementary forms straight angles. So let's look at example 1 here. It says June is cutting a tile. The rectangular tile was cut diagonally like this. Classify the relationship between angle A, which is this one, and angle B, which is this one. Well, if I put them together, I get a right angle, which means that they are complementary. So if angle A is 52 degrees, by the way, the way this is read is the measure of angle A is 53 degrees. Find the measure of angle B. Well, if they add up to 90, then 53 plus the angle of B is 90. So subtract 53 from both sides. I get B is equal to 37 degrees. So the measure of angle B is 37 degrees. All right, let's talk about special angle relationships. So, alternate interior angles. What we're looking at here is this diagram. So we have two parallel lines and a line that cuts right through them. This line here, this is called a transversal. So when we start talking about alternate interior angles, these are angles on opposite sides of the transversal. And they are inside the two parallel lines. So for example, 4 and 6 are on opposite sides of the transversal and they're both inside the parallel line. So we would say that angle 4 and angle 6 are alternate interior angles. Special thing about these, they are congruent. Alternate exterior now. So, same thing. These are angles on opposite sides of the transversal, just like we did with alternate interior angles. The only difference is these are outside the parallel lines. So, we can look at 1 and 7. They're on opposite sides of the transversal, and they're on the outside of the parallel lines. So we can say like angle 1 and angle 7. Special thing here, they are also congruent to each other. So if I know what 1 is, I can find out what 7 is. Last angle we're going to be talking about is corresponding angles. So these angles, they are in the same position. And what I mean by that is they're on the same side of the transversal. The only difference is they're on the opposite parallel line. So, for example, if I pick 1, the angle that is in the exact same position as angle 1 on the opposite parallel line would be angle 5. They're in the exact same position. Angle 2 and angle 6 are corresponding. 4 and 8 are in the same position. 3 and 7 are in the same position. So we could say, for example, like angle 4 and angle 8. And the special thing here is they are congruent as well. So those three relationships, and then one from earlier is with the vertical lines, those can all be used to figure out missing angle measures because they're all congruent. Vertical angles are congruent. Alternate interior, those are congruent. Alternate exterior, those are congruent. Corresponding angles, those are congruent. So let's utilize this information now to find angle 9 and angle 13 to classify them. So let's look at our diagram here. So angle 9 is this one right here. Angle 13 is this one right here. They're formed by this transversal and these two parallel lines. Now, they're not both inside and they're not both outside the parallel lines. So they're not alternate interior, they're not alternate exterior. They're not formed by two lines, they're formed by three. One line, here's a second line for angle 9, and this is the third line to form angle 13. So they're not vertical angles either. But they are in the same side of the transversal, they're both on the top side, and they're in the same position on different parallel lines, which means that these two angles are corresponding angles. And then part B, if the measure of angle 13 is 75 degrees, find the measure of angle 11 and find the measure of angle 15 and then explain. So here's 13, here's 11. Those two are related because they're both inside the parallel lines on opposite sides of the transversal. So those are alternate interior angles, which means they're the same measure. So since measure of angle 13 is 75 degrees, measure of angle 11 is also 75 degrees. Because angle 11 and angle 13 are alternate interior angles. And then the second part, finding measure of angle 15. So let's look back at our diagram. Angle 15 is this one right here. 13 and 15. They're not in the same position. They're not both inside, they're not both outside. So they're not corresponding alternate interior or alternate exterior. But they are formed by two lines. They share a vertex. They don't share a side. These are vertical angles. Vertical angles are also congruent. So since 13 is 75 degrees, measure of angle 15 is also 75 degrees. Because angle 13 and angle 15 are vertical angles. All right, this is the end of lesson 1. If you have any questions, please let me know.